So you see how terrible that footage is, and I will admit I am completely embarrassed and ashamed of that. I am better than that. I expect better of myself, and I hope you expect better of me as well. But I want to show you some of the techniques that I was using in that, hopefully in focus this time. One big thing to note is that this board is 3/4 of an inch thick. What I was using right there is a 7/8 sawn in half, so it's more like 7/16 inch thick. So everything is a bit finer. A big thing to note is that I did do a rebate on that project, but it'd be just as strong if you do a butt joint on it. This is 6 inches wide. I will be gluing this, which is a sketchy distance, and I'm just gonna glue probably the center 1.5 inches, just so that the rest of this can move. What we're gonna do is do rebate joints on the end here, both sides. And when you do that on both sides, you end up with a tenon. The first thing I need to do here is I need to plane this edge square. If you don't have one, you should build a shooting board, but you can get away with just planing the end grain in here and testing it a lot. I'm going to do it the easy way. I know I'm going to remove this waste, so I'm going to chamfer off an edge, actually probably both edges, so that I can plane across without worrying about breaking out the edges. Not super worried about that being perfectly straight, I just want a clean edge. The next thing you see me do in that video is I remove the waste. So I drew out the curves using a can. This time I used my oil can, but we're gonna remove most of that waste. And the way we're gonna do it is very simply with the chisel. The chisel is resting on here. Only angle on it is because of the handle. Now I'm lifting up the handle for the second cut, just a little. And I keep lifting it up, moving closer to the edge, following the curve, but keep lifting the handle up. There it is. That's the edge, and it's right on that line. This actually looks better than the box did. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drill the holes here like I did for the back panel of the box. It's centered, marked out, and what you will notice is that that board that I was using is actually very thin. The snail on my auger bit is actually larger than the thickness of this board. So that's why when you look at the video, you'll blurrily see something that looks like this. I had a board clamped on the back, and that's so that my snail could keep pulling through. What you're supposed to do with an auger bit is go through till you feel the snail, flip the board over, and drill back through. That's what I'm going to do here with this board, but it wasn't really possible with this board. That's the snail sticking through. You can see what we got going on there, 3 holes. One thing to note here is that this auger bit is actually meant for hardwood. It has a fine thread on there, so it may jam up in pine, which means you got to back it out and clean out that bit, or actually use the correct bit. This one's sharpened and it's in my brace, so I'm sticking with it. Flip the board around, cut in from the other side. When I chisel this out, I'm gonna start at the peaks and then work my way back to the tops, the tangents of the circles. You can go in and then chisel, go straight in, chisel it out, go in straight, chisel it out. But make sure this is sharp, which this should be. That's pretty straight. Everything else that's in there, we're just gonna clean up with a file. The tenon itself is going to be 2 rebates or rabbits, depending on where you're from. One on this side and one on this side. This is a cross grain one, so it's going to be different than the one that I did in the video. But just to show you what I was doing in the video, I was doing a long grain with the grain rebate. I was using my moving Philister plane that I fixed a couple episodes ago. If you're going long grain, you want to retract the knicker. You don't need it. If you're going across grain, you do want that knicker because it scores it. This one's going to be set up right now to use on that, but I'm going to use it with the knicker here. Just note that if you have this, retract the knicker in this situation. So. That's what I was doing in the video, except I had the knicker retracted. If you don't have that plane, you shouldn't worry about it. A little bit of a story is, I now live in New Zealand, and when my wife came down to the shop and said, how would you feel about moving to New Zealand? I was actually making this plane. This is the Paul Sellers Poor Man's rebate plane, rabbit plane, which is just an old chisel flipped upside down with the handle removed and a little fence. But this actually works very well. I'm going to show you that real quick. That's the shaving that's coming out of it. Or, if you have a shoulder plane, you just use it. Which this actually needs to go this way. And no, I'm not actually doing this right. I'm just trying to clean up the rebate that's there. Let's finish this project though. Now, I have a beautiful knife wall for that. Bring it across. I have the knife wall in there. I'm gonna pop it out. I have a little groove in there for a saw to get into, or just to give a nice edge whenever the plane is working. Couple things to note here. This board is wider than this, because once you start to fit this, you're going to want these edges so that you can pull it back off. Second thing is, this tenon is slightly wider than the groove, and you want to do that just so that you can fit this into that hole. You can remove more material, but you can't really put it back. This is a fancy back saw, but I have one that I'm working on that was $8. I have another one that was $40. This thing was a lot of money. It's nice once you get into it, but you can find cheap ones, believe me, at secondhand stores, antique stores, flea markets. If you're doing a long cut like this, you will need to keep pulling it out and removing the waste that collects in there. So for this side, I'm going to use a chisel. I'm not going to go to the full depth of the rebate to create this tenon. I'm only going to go halfway. You do that, only go halfway or a third of the way so that you can see if the wood grain is going one way or the other. That grain's running straight. So we come down here. That grain is running straight. I still have roughly 1/8 of an inch to go, so we'll go back through. This is all fairly straight grain except for a little bit right in here, so I'm gonna go on my line. One thing to note there, my hands are always behind the cutting edge. And I'm not over here, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing this, I'm doing this. Even gap across, that is actually the tenon being too long. So that gap is how much of this tenon I need to remove. And we're gonna do it the easy way with the hand plane. That's dead on. That's enough. I'll probably be putting a lot of coats of a linseed oil on it, not boiled linseed oil, a food grade linseed oil on it. And it will then become a vegetable chopping board. But there you go, the round over, the holes that I drilled, and 2 rebates, only glued in the center so that the rest of the wood can continue to move. There's many, many more ways of cutting these rebates / tenons. So search around YouTube. I'll try to put some in the description. So don't feel like you can't do it. You can do this. It's not the best thing in the world, but it's pretty nice. And it was quickly done. Actually, they're going to be pretty close to being the same different thing. That doesn't even make sense.